welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so if you're thinking about turning a hit video game into a movie, history suggests you're basically walking into a creative minefield. And it's just notorious for disappointment, right?
It really is. And yet somehow the Resident Evil film series, it didn't just, survive that minefield. It actually thrived, commercially at least.
Exactly. And that's our focus today. We're diving into the sources around the fifth movie, Resident Evil, Retribution 3D, which came out in 2012. Our mission really is to unpack this huge paradox. How did this series become the most successful video game movie franchise ever, financially?
By a long shot.
While at the same time, just becoming this, lightning rod for criticism.
Yeah.
And, intense fan anger for basically throwing the source material out the window.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It's like the ultimate case study in maybe business strategy, just steamrolling creative faithfulness. And if you look back at the origins, you can kind of see that tension right from the start.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, back in 1997, Constantin Films got the rights, and initially fans were overjoyed because they hired George A. Romero.
The George A. Romero, master of zombie horror.
Exactly, to write the script. So everyone's thinking, okay, this is going to be it.
That was the dream, right?
Yeah.
A proper horror director tackling the T-Virus, Raccoon City, the STARS team, all that stuff from the games. It felt like they were aiming for that survival horror vibe.
It did, but the studio ended up rejecting Romero's script, and they went with one written by Paul W.S. Anderson instead.
Now Anderson, who then directed the first film and, pretty much shaped the entire series, didn't he?
He absolutely did, and that decision right there, that was the first big pivot point, choosing that high-octane action style over, a faithful horror adaptation.
Okay, before we get into the weeds on Retribution, let's just lay out the scale of this financial success. Because the sources, they don't leave much room for doubt here.
No, they really don't. The numbers are just staggering. The sources show the combined budget for all the films was around, $284 million USD?
Yeah, something like that.
But together, they raked in a massive $876 million worldwide.
Wow.
So that audience appeal was undeniable, which is exactly why, when this review of Retribution came out in 2012, a sixth film were already locked in.
The money train just kept rolling.
Pretty much. The financial engine was just unstoppable.
And that, I guess, explains why the complaints from the game purists, no matter how loud they got, probably felt, irrelevant to the studio heads. But what was the biggest creative departure, the thing that really got under the skin of the original game fans?
It really boils down to one character, Alice, played by Milla Jovovich.
Right, not from the games.
Not at all. So while the first film, it kept some elements, Raccoon City, the T-Virus, Umbrella, Alice was completely original, created just for the Murrays, and she very quickly went from this sort of shadowy figure to, the review calls her an efficient killing machine with superpowers.
Superpowers, yeah.
Yeah.
Which just completely overwrote the established game characters and lore.
Totally. And, as you noted, Milla Jovovich is married to Paul W.S. Anderson, the director and writer.
Which, certainly puts an interesting perspective on that. Intense creative focus on this original character, maybe sidelining the game's own heroes.
It does add a layer, yeah. So now, if we dive into the fifth film, Retribution, the plot there just perfectly shows this complete shift towards pure spectacle.
Okay, walk us through the setup for this one, because it sounds like Anderson was basically trying to find a way to bring back every single monster and character he could possibly think of.
That's not far off, actually. So Alice is meant to be powerless at this point, right? Following the end of the previous film, Afterlife.
Okay, powerless Alice. Got it.
And she finds herself trapped in this huge umbrella underground facility. But it's not just any facility. It's built specifically to stage, get this, apocalypse-style simulations.
Simulations. So that's the story excuse for why suddenly you can have zombies from Tokyo, monsters from Moscow, whatever, all in one place for Alice to fight.
Exactly. It's a narrative blank check for action sequences. And in the middle of all this chaos, she gets help from, a very unlikely source. Her old enemy, Albert Wesker.
Wesker.
Yeah.
The main villain from the games, helping her.
Apparently so. In the movie, he supposedly abandoned Umbrella. He's fighting for humanity now because the Red Queen, the evil AI computer, has decided she wants to wipe out mankind.
That's quite a turnaround for one of gaming's biggest bad guys.
It is. So Wesker sends another game character, Ada Wong, played by Li Bingbing, to help Alice escape this simulation facility. And that kind of kicks off the main plot.
It sounds less like a story evolving and more like, I don't know, the writer's just scraping the bottom of the barrel for reasons to string together big action scenes.
The source critique strongly suggests exactly that. a real struggle for fresh ideas, leading to some, let's say, desperate creative choices.
I mean, yeah, they threw in fan-favorite game characters like Leon S. Kennedy and Barry Burton.
Okay, hold on. If he's bringing back characters like Leon and Barry, isn't that maybe an attempt to listen to the fans? To course correct a bit? You'd think so, maybe. But the reviewer argues that these additions felt really forced, kind of arbitrary. And the real sign of creative, well, bankruptcy, according to the source, was how he brought back dead people.
The clones. I remember reading about that.
Yes, Michelle Rodriguez, for example, she comes back playing 2 different clones of her character from the first movie.
Right.
When you start relying on bringing back dead characters purely as clones, that's generally not seen as fan service. It feels more like, well, a failure to invent something new, especially for a $65 million film.
And didn't the review also mention some really weird set piece, something that felt like it was lifted straight out of Aliens?
Yeah, that's right. Apparently there's this sequence that's a clear homage or maybe just a ripoff of the claustrophobic action in Aliens, but it was just sort of shoved in there with no real story reason. Just seems like a reference for reference's sake.
Okay, so relying on borrowed ideas rather than building something original.
Seems that way. It highlights this reliance on just throwing things at the screen rather than constructing, a coherent scene.
This analysis really frames the core issue, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When the director seems to prioritize just sheer spectacle, explosions, fights, monsters, over things like plot coherence or character consistency,
Yeah.
What happens to the actual quality of the filmmaking, even with a big budget? Let's pivot to the critique of the production values themselves.
Yeah, despite that $65 million budget, the review is scathing about how the film actually looks and feels. Take the opening credits, for instance. They were shot in this completely unnecessary reverse slow motion.
Reverse slow motion? Why?
Well, the reviewer argues it only served to highlight the horrendous special effects and really shocking green screen work.
Oh, wow. So the stylistic choice actually made the technical flaws more obvious.
Exactly. Not ideal. And the overall look, the aesthetics, were also criticized, described as looking like, quote, The Matrix on cocaine, and also just being very dark, which, was a complaint leveled at Anderson's Alien vs. Predator, too. Just murky and hard to see sometimes.
And the 3D, that was a big selling point, right? Retribution 3D.
Yeah, it was supposed to be. But according to the review, it was basically a joke. The reviewer even noted that taking the 3D glasses off sometimes made parts of the film clearer.
That's not how 3D is supposed to work. That's not adding value. That's actually making it worse.
Precisely. It's like a sensory obstacle rather than an enhancement.
Which brings us to that budget irony the reviewer hammered home. They specifically compared Retribution's $65 million cost to another sci-fi film around that time, Looper.
Yeah, Looper cost about $30 million, and the review basically asks, how can Retribution look so unpolished with more than double the money?
It's a sharp point. It doesn't just question the quality, it sort of exposes the whole business model, maybe?
I think so. It suggests the big budget was there for the idea of scale, for the brand name, for securing Mila Jovovich, maybe, but not necessarily for careful execution. Clearly, the money didn't all go into, top-tier writing or seamless effects or even coherent editing by the sounds of it.
And speaking of writing,
Yeah.
The script and the acting didn't escape the criticism either, right? The dialogue was called.
Atrocious, just flat out atrocious dialogue, according to the source.
Okay.
And maybe more importantly, the script completely torpedoes its own setup. It makes a point of saying Alice is powerless now. Remember? From the last film.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a key plot point, vulnerable Alice.
Right. But then, the moment the action starts, she's immediately back to being near invincible. It just throws that narrative thread away instantly for the sake of another big fight scene.
That must be incredibly frustrating as a viewer. To be told the stakes have changed, only to see them immediately ignored.
It shows, I think, a complete lack of interest in story continuity compared to just delivering the next action beat. But the most memorable critique, maybe the most specific, cringeworthy detail involves Sienna Guillory's performance as Jill Valentine.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
The reviewer described her while she's firing her guns as doing this pelvic thrust in a stranger swaying motion.
A pelvic thrust while shooting.
That's what the review says. The reviewer literally wrote they didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and in the end, they chose to cry.
Wow. I mean, that single bizarre detail kind of captures the whole feeling, doesn't it? Like maybe the choreography and direction were just off.
Way off, it seems. And the final verdict on the film itself. The reviewer said it resembled a video game, but then quickly added, that wasn't a compliment.
Ouch. So all the repetitive, maybe disjointed parts of a game, but without any of the fun of actually playing it.
That seems to be the implication, yeah.
So let's recap. We have a film with a $65 million budget that apparently looks cheap in places, has a plot that makes no sense even on its own terms, terrible dialogue, questionable acting choices, and yet Retribution grossed over $200 million globally.
Yeah.
The audience was absolutely there for this formula.
They really were. And this whole cycle, critical panning but huge box office success, leads us nicely into the broader commentary we found linked to this review. It touches on this idea often called franchise fatigue.
Right. And what's interesting there is how this external viewpoint connects Resident Evil's success pattern to what happens with other huge IPs. The argument presented is basically that lazy, sloppy writing often gets attached to big, established names. The source mentions examples like Halloween, maybe Star Wars, Star Trek, just because the name itself guarantees a certain level of profit.
Exactly. The brand recognition alone secures the opening weekend, secures the international sales, which means, the incentive for the studio might be more towards just delivering something recognizable with that name attached, rather than focusing on, say, originality or genuine creative risk.
The source suggests this often leads to mostly deleterious ends for the actual art form. Basically, it can hurt creativity overall.
It becomes a business model where nostalgia is almost the main product being sold.
Yeah, and the source did provide a quick counterpoint, didn't it? Just briefly mentioning appreciation for filmmakers who work on a totally different track, like Ken Loach.
Right. Filmmakers focused on social critique, original stories, often with tiny budgets compared to these blockbusters. It really forces you, the listener, to kind of confront that split in the film industry. You've got one path focusing on maybe relevant original work,
And the other path focused purely on spectacle, high budgets, mass market appeal, leveraging that existing brand to guarantee profit, almost regardless of the creative execution.
It's a stark contrast.
So, wrapping this up, what's the key takeaway for you, the listener, trying to make sense of all this? Well, the Resident Evil film series really stands out as this prime example of how you can achieve massive commercial success with an adaptation by essentially completely ignoring source fidelity.
Yeah, pivoting hard away from the original feel, embracing that big budget action spectacle model, and clearly prioritizing bums on seats over glowing reviews.
It worked for them financially.
Undeniably. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the really interesting question these sources raise is this. If a film series can be the most successful video game adaptation ever, despite all this specific documented evidence of, frankly, low-quality production, incoherent plots, creative struggles like we saw with Retribution,
Yeah.
what does that success actually mean for the future? For the standards we should expect when studios adapt any beloved book, comic, or game?
It does raise that uncomfortable thought, doesn't it? If just delivering huge spectacle and maybe some fan service guarantees profit, are filmmakers basically incentivized to do just that, even if it means sacrificing coherent storytelling or respecting the source material or even just making a well-edited movie? Is that the new definition of success in Hollywood adaptations?
It's definitely something to think about next time you hear a studio announce they're adapting something you love for the big screen. What are they really aiming for?
On that rather provocative thought, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.